I'm going to talk to you about Agile and Agile project management specifically. So in an Agile project, technical excellence is measured by both capacity to deliver customer value today and to create an adaptable product for tomorrow, which I think is really nice because I think we should all approach our websites from the sense that it can never be finished. There's always more you can do to improve upon it and to keep that competitive edge, because whilst you're doing all you can, so will your competitors be. So it's really important to stay ahead of the game. So how can project management and the way we set our projects up help us to succeed in this way? So here at Jellyfish, we practice sort of two different forms of project management. The first being waterfall. So with waterfall project management, it's very much about a sequential step process through the tasks. You break it down into phases that typically run back to back, and one would be dependent on another. It's a very predictable project workflow. There are clear dependencies between stages, and you'll typically find that you have a very fixed scope and a fixed budget. It's very understood. But there's a heavy reliance there on that upfront understanding, really knowing everything about what it is you're going to do before you get started. And it typically goes like this. We would start off with the UX phase, if we're talking about a website, and then that would flow through to the creative phase. Then we move into development, and then right at the end, we'd get to testing. Well, the problem with that is that testing is forced then to wait until everything else is ready. And it's really hard to create test plans and scripts. It can be really complicated. So debugging the actual source of the error can be really tough. You don't know quite where something may have cropped up that would have had quite a heavy performance impact because you've not involved people from the beginning. And it's really hard then to go back on that and to correct that mistake because something might have gone right at the beginning. There might be something wrong with the way the UX is set up. And you've just carried on down that road. So then there's Agile, which is our sort of preferred methodology for projects like this. And if you're not familiar, it's very much set up as an iterative approach. We break the work down into small chunks or sprints, which are typically 2 weeks. And it actively encourages change and revision and frequent reassessment of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So yes, I said it allows for change throughout, but we're meeting regularly to reassess the direction and the approach. Is it still answering our core goal? What are we learning? So as we learn, it enables continuous improvement. We'll figure stuff out as we go, and we'll find better ways and better solutions for doing things. And it encourages that collaborative working between us as the agency or partner and you as the client, so that we bring each other along for the ride and we understand why we're making decisions and we don't try and figure it all out up front. But there are pitfalls to this as well. And many of us have been guilty of this, where we'll do the sprints, but we'll have, at the end of the project, a testing sprint. So we're back to kind of square one in that sense. And you're then struggling with the same kind of problems that you get from the waterfall method of delivery. So what can we do about it? Well, the best thing we can do is to build testing into sprints. So you need to figure out a few things if you're going to do that. You need to identify the reasons for performance testing. What aspects of performance are really important to your users? And the earlier you discover those issues in your code, the sooner you can actually work on the solution, finding better ways of doing things. You'll also be able to prioritize because you'll understand which elements are causing the greatest amount of friction and what techniques you might be able to employ, such as lazy loading or some of the other things that we've talked about to get over this, to overcome those things first. And then you can plan those subsequent sprints based on that learning and move forward. So we'll talk about this a fair bit today, but performance level SLOs, service level objectives. So a performance level SLO and a performance goal are not the same thing. So your objective, you should think of as your MVP. It's absolutely what you need to do as a minimum, and your goal could be your stretch target. You need to establish a benchmark against some key metrics or indicators, such as things like this. So DNS resolution time, time to display, time to last or first byte, system uptime, devices, locations. But once you decide what those things are, make sure they're realistic, but make sure you stick to them. And Ashley will talk more about some of those metrics later. But you need to think of it, and Matt mentioned it already, as a way of performance budgeting. What are we working with? How much do we want to spend on this? And companies like the BBC are really, really good at this. They'll set page load limits for key pages like their news page, and they'll adhere to that. But you need to build a plan that is really simple to test and execute and repeat, because it's important that you test every 2 weeks after every sprint so that you can understand the learnings and you can make sure that something you've tested before hasn't suddenly been impacted by something else. And you should be identifying key points that are going to be really important to your users, whether that's part of your active sprint or not. So go back over the homepage or the cart or the contact form, because you need to keep on top of those and make sure that there's something something you've done hasn't had an adverse impact. So when we think about a project like a web build, something like that, we'll try to break it down into a series of what we call epics, user stories, and tasks. So it needs to be broken into manageable chunks, something that we can get our teeth into and understand and translate to our teams as to exactly what we need and what we want them to do. So you start off with an epic, which is a big picture idea. And they're too big to tackle off the bat. You need to understand them better and understand what it is that's going to help get us to that point. So we'll break that down into user stories, and I'll focus more on that in a moment. But again, it's too big to just do. You need to then break that down into manageable tasks, something that you can actually make actionable, something that you can explain to somebody and be tangible, and something you can deliver within a sprint. Your sprint objectives that you set should never take you beyond 2 weeks. So you need to think about everything as this controlled, limited level of effort. So what are user stories? So when we write a user story, we're trying to identify the role, the goal, and the benefit. This is the who, the what, and the why of what we're doing. And a great exercise would be to write your user story on an index card like this. And if you can't fit your story on an index card, then it's probably too big. You probably haven't honed your story down enough to be really something actionable. And then you should start thinking about all the different types of users that you have. A website will have many people coming to it for many different reasons, but there could be internal and external users that you need to consider that with very different motivations and needs. And you need to understand what those motivations and needs are. They could be coming because they want to purchase. They could be looking for information. They could be trying to understand about careers with you and your business. Or if it's an internal user, maybe it's about them coming and doing site updates on a regular basis. They can't be forgotten too. And the point of it is that the functionality should always answer a goal. If the functionality you're building doesn't answer a user goal, do you really need it? Typically, though, when we create these, performance doesn't factor into those user stories, but it should. So we should look at performance criteria. So we have a defined user story that we're happy with, right? So in this example, as a shopper, I want to view a list of products so I can select some shoes to purchase. We've got our who, the shopper. We've got our what, view the list of products. And we've got our why. They want to buy some shoes, right? So it's answering everything we need it to from a purely a functional perspective, but we're missing all of the subjective elements that are going to make this either a successful story or a failure. So we need to be considering things such as speed, device, and even the time of day which somebody might typically try and do this. If you think about a travel application or a travel website, they're going to see higher load volumes and traffic around peak commuter times. Or if you're building something for a particular part of the world, you need to understand what their data connection. So you're constantly considering the experience of those users and how they are going to interact with this and where and when. So performance criteria will help us improve on that user story and ultimately drive satisfaction. So in this example, we could set performance criteria to say that the first 8 products should display within 3 seconds on mobile. That all other products should load in the background ahead of anyone trying or wanting to get into filtering. And it must be able to handle 10,000 concurrent users. It's no good doing it fantastically well if it starts to fall down when you've got more than one customer, right? And you need to know that. And your analytics will help you understand and shape what the performance criteria ought to be. So building performance testing and performance acceptance criteria into every sprint, you're avoiding leaving it to the end. You're creating that opportunity for yourselves to refine and improve that performance as you go. And you're going to really understand which functional elements create the biggest performance impact for you. And ultimately, if you do this, you're putting your users first. So I like this quote from Dan Liu, and I'll just read it. When I was at Google, someone told me a story about a time that they completed a big optimization push, only to find that measured page load times increased. And when they dug into the data, they found that the reason load times had increased was that they got a lot more traffic from Africa after doing the optimizations. The team's product went from being unusable for people with slow connections to being usable, which caused so many users coming in that with slow connections to start to use the product that the load times actually increased, right? So ironic, isn't it, that you're trying your best to improve performance and all you've then done is open it up to a whole bunch of people that could never use it before. That's fantastic, right? You're growing your audience, but that in itself creates its own challenges. It brings more people in, it creates more performance impact and puts more pressure. But I think this, as I said at the beginning, calls back to what I mentioned, is that you should never think of your website as being finished. There's always more there's more you can do, there's more impact you can have and add, and you're always able to look ahead and continually look at both what your competitors are doing and what your audience is telling you. So it's all about incremental gains. And that's exactly what Agile project management as a way of working gives you. Thank you.